coalition government has reversed the ban on offshore oil and gas exploration, but will that be enough to entice oil and gas companies back? To talk about that, I'm joined by Resources Minister Shane Jones. Now, look, when we talked about this in February, you were then saying that you were seeking advice from officials about ways that you could get companies to come back, to reassure them if they did come back, they wouldn't be left in the lurch if a future government made changes again. You talked about possible compensation. Are you any further down the track on that sort of advice?
Well, the main problem I face in terms of underwriting their return, whether it's through instruments such as bonds, is the level of appetite that will need to be around amongst my colleagues for the Crown to underwrite it. My suggestions have travelled a tad further than that, and it seems to me, first you have to make this decision. Over the next 15 to 20 years, possibly 30 years, is New Zealand still going to need fossil fuels? Now, I've long since concluded the answer is yes. Should it be coal or gas? So I'd prefer gas and coal. So in the event that you conceive the future with a need for a wee nation like ourselves to have backup contingency in the form of fossil fuels, and then you say, okay, let's imagine that it's gas, how do I encourage gas investment? Then the first thing they're going to look for is, who are my customers? And if my customers are going to be scared off or decamp from New Zealand because a future government will not allow legally them to use gas, then we're never going to get anyone to invest in gas, never. So one way around it, which I've suggested that the officials should look at, is reprising the Maui gas contract. And if new investors do find that they have both the appetite, the capital, and can create the infrastructure, so we have a continual level of access to gas, would a 30-year contract, and then what would be the role of the Crown? Facilitating that amongst a whole bunch of users, de-risking it, underwriting it, because obviously we're not living in the 70s any longer, although an energy system lies at the future of the New Zealand economy evolving. So the only other step that I've shared with the officials is, are there any lessons to be learnt, de-risking or strengthening the appetite of new investors by giving them greater confidence, perhaps through a contract.
So if they had a contract, if it was broken, then they presumably could.
That's what I'm saying. If you break a 30-year contract because a different government comes in with different ideological priorities, then they've got to write out the Gregory for having violated the contract. So look, I hasten to say this is not cabinet policy, but I am genuinely concerned, mate, that if we rely just on solar and wind, which is important, but if we don't have a backup, why would you come to New Zealand and create a new manufacturing business? Why would you expand in New Zealand if you had ongoing doubts about the ability to run your business through consistent, affordable levels of electricity?
Have you had conversations with oil and gas companies about, and other, I suppose, mining companies?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I, during the period of time while we were on our unwanted sabbatical, I spoke on a regular basis.
I mean, since you've been in government,
sorry.
and now that you've announced that the ban is being reversed, you're going to introduce legislation, in the next month or two?
Yep.
But there's a big difference between doing that and then companies coming. And I think, again, going back to when we spoke late last year, you had raised the problems that you thought a number of companies had been scared away.
Yep. So the members of the peak body have been in my office. I spoke via an electronic presentation last week about the oil and gas decisions. I'm planning, as I told you before, to go overseas and talk up the prospects. The advice I've been given, though, which still rings in my ear, is look after the children you have. So those are the current people that are already in the industry that have remained here, and do as much as possible. So, and I've taken a lot of my soundings from them. I mean, let's face it was a controversial call as to whether or not we recalibrate the decommissioning burden. My political opponents will say that we've weakened the position of the Crown. But this is all driven by me believing if we don't secure more access to gas, we are always going to be reliant on coal. I just do not accept, given that the country doesn't want any more hydro dams. Without fast track, I don't see us getting any more large-scale geothermal developments. And whilst solar and wind are important contributors, they're also very intermittent. So I've just arrived at a point that gas, as a host of other countries are. I mean, I'm often told, oh, well, you're a dinosaur because you're thinking about yesterday's industry. No, Aramco, they are slowly but surely downscaling their oil industry, but they're upscaling gas. So I don't think that I'm too far off the mark.
How soon do you think, though, could it be that someone could turn up here and start exploring again once the legislation's through? Because how soon, for instance, will that become law?
Well, all going well, it'll be done and dusted certainly by the end of the year. I'll share this anecdote with you. Earlier this year, people flew in from Malaysia to see me in my office with my staff because I was mightily unimpressed about the fact that it looked as if Tamarind, the people who fled, had buggered off, left New Zealand with a pile of debt in terms of having to fix up the Tamarind unplugged wells. And in fairness to the people who were associated only tangentially, they came to New Zealand and set the record straight with me and have invited me to go back up there because they do believe there is definitely ongoing interest in the New Zealand gas industry. But they all said to me, how confident should we be that we have medium to long-term customers in your country? And is it possible that industry might move out of New Zealand to find another place where they have long-term security? And those questions, I think, are questions that are avoided by a lot of my colleagues in the other side of the House. And anyway, look, I've laid out where I think the vulnerabilities are in terms of securing better outcomes for our energy policy. Obviously, Minister Simeon stood up an officials group, and it's got the main users and contributors to the gas industry on that group. And no doubt, amongst other things, they're going to look at, okay, what interventions may be necessary from the Crown to secure greater confidence to actually maintain an ongoing gas industry, not the least of which is what is Methanex going to do.
So do you have a sense of when you might, for instance, take a paper to Cabinet making some proposals around that?
Well, the first thing to do is we must pass the bill and ensure that we answer all reasonable questions and respond to predictable criticisms against the bill. And then I'll be guided by MB and the gas industry itself as to what other interventions might be needed. But, at one level I could keep clandestine and have people doing all sorts of bits of work, but I see no harm in occasionally sharing with the public, well, this is what we're looking at. It may never come to pass, but it's important that people in the industry people in the debate have a good sense as to how innovative our thinking is.
But if it never comes to pass, how likely is it then that anyone will come here to look for?
I mean, the people that are already here, if I take, for example, OMV, now they're going through an ownership change, but the new owners of OMV, at some point they'll come to New Zealand, and I want them to see a regime that is both credible and capable of being navigated. So at one level, it's good for me to get out there and promote it. I mean, after all, this new bill is going to use the word promote. Actually go and humble ourselves and see people in the quarters where all this capital is amassed and syndicated, and then bring them back. So I don't want to be too negative, but I wanted to be straight up with Kiwis that the feedback that I was given right when I took this role is it's one thing to change the legislation, it's another thing to change the disposition, the temperament, and the confidence. And recently we had the famous Wallaby, Nick Farr Jones, he brought a group of investors to New Zealand. They were quite excited by the change of attitude towards mining, and including oil and gas. And even he said to me, look, we're very happy that someone's standing up and articulating a slightly different approach to the future, but know this from us, it's already a busy dance card for people that own capital as to where they deploy it. So you're going to have to defang their misapprehensions about New Zealand and give them the confidence that indiscriminately their investments aren't going to be written out of the script, because their customers will be written out of the script.
Shane Jones, thank you for your time.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
To support our award-winning independent journalism, subscribe to nbr.co.nz.